Good morning and a very warm welcome to Worthing Baptist Church. Please join us after the service when 10 minutes after the service Peter and I will be on Facebook Live, and Peter and I will be reflecting on this service but any comments or questions that you might have. And I think today we'll raise some questions and comments, and maybe it might even tempt you for the first time to join us. Please do that. Whoever you are, you'll be more than welcome. Nice little community that's forming actually on Facebook Live after the service. And in the service, I'm going to be chatting on and off to Liz West. Liz used to be a church leader, and for many years now she has been teaching the Enneagram, which is about discipleship, it's about the inner journey, it's about hopefully becoming more like the character of God and more the person that God created us to be. She'll say more about that later. But part of what she touches upon also is she refers to the wrestle that Jacob had with God. I'm going to be coming back to those words, those verses at the end of the service, just before the blessing. But listen to these. These take place when Jacob is on a journey himself, and Jacob, who has swindled his brother Esau out of his inheritance, is now going back to face Esau. And in the midst of this, there's a bit of wrestling that goes on with God. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship his holy name, sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning, it's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship his holy name, sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship your holy name. You're rich in love and you're slow to anger. Your name is great and your has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and live forever. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name. Yes, I worship Your holy name.
Yeah, so thanks, Liz, for agreeing to do this. And I wondered if you could start by saying a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your faith.
Oh, thanks, Mike, for this. Yes, I've really enjoyed getting to know you through the Enneagram. It's been a really great journey. Value you highly. So my journey, I became Christian when I was 18 and straight into the evangelical world in London, and married and had children, and we were fine, upstanding members of our local church, and got involved with the charismatic, and I started working with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and my husband was a lawyer in the city, long hours, 60-hour week kind of thing, and we had the 3 children. So it was a big challenge when in 1991 our church leader asked us if we would church plant with another couple, some friends. So we were wondering, he said he gave us a blank sheet. So it was an FIEC church, so the leadership there were not into women in leadership, so we had to leave the FIEC in order to church plant. And so we were adrift for a while, just being looked after by the leadership of our sending church. And we very clearly were led, wonderful story, thank you God, to a cell church model, a small group model, so that the emphasis of the church is on small groups, small communities. Church in the neighborhood is where we thought, church in people's homes. We were deconstructing all that idea of usually the male leader, people gathering round. The statement that I couldn't cope with, felt so strongly about, was, you ask a friend, how's your church going? And their first thing that they'd said was, the vicar, the minister, ... I didn't want to be leading a church where us as leaders were the prime movers. We wanted to empower the people to find their own relationship with God and their own way of being Christians, and to find what it was that gave them life and where they could be out in the community and doing what was motivating them. So that church model of small groups in neighborhoods was very exciting, and we worked on that together. David coming back from meetings, eating his supper off a plate and going straight into an 8 o'clock church, often in our home, kids in bed. It was full on for 10 years. And then David died rather suddenly and tragically. And so I was left with wonderful man, Trevor Withers, trained in the Baptist church, but was with us by that time. And he gathered a group around him. And he enabled me to make the contribution I could, but my grief was very deep and long. And so I then, 7 years on, moved to Oxford and went to 11 of the different churches, and I found patriarchy in every single one of them. And thankfully, the moment came where I said to God, I cannot cope with patriarchy anymore. I've had so much of it. I just can't stick with it. So I don't now actually go to a church that meets on a Sunday. I go to a church in the kitchen where we're a contemplative group of people who are no leader, and we work out our journey towards God between us, and it's very precious to me.
Can I ask you, when you were part of the church that you set up together, what did you find were the things that encouraged you about the people you were with, and also some of the discouragements or challenges about that style of church, about that kind of church? What were the encouragements and what were the things that frustrated you?
I think it takes us all a long,
as well as patriarchy.
takes us all a long time to change, and we were asking the people who came with us to change. We had a very definite set of values. We wanted to be a values-driven church, so the structures came out of the values. And for those people who've been Christians a long time, it wasn't a place where their needs were being met. It was a place where there was challenge. It wasn't comfortable in any way. And for those wonderful people who were up for it, up for the challenge, I think we planted with 36 and we ended with 12, who found out pretty quickly it wasn't what they wanted to do. They thought it would be a reproduction of our mother church on a smaller scale, and it wasn't. Not that hadn't been right for them, but we didn't want to do that again, and our church leader was more than happy for us to reinvent what we were doing. You know how sometimes the leaders are meant to be the ones who are on a higher spiritual plane and have the resources and be able to sort out people's problems. Well, we had no training whatsoever. Nobody was theological. Nobody had even, I think David had preached once at our previous church. We were like the book in one hand and the church in the other. But we grew over a period of time through the small groups. These small group leaders went out and they made relationships and they gathered people around us, and we ended up with 12 small groups which were clustering together to form the church. So that was the good thing.
And a mixed bag of encouragement and frustrations with people, journeying with people.
Journeying with people, we learnt that if we were going to change the way people were dependent on church leaders, we were going to need to work very closely and individually with those who found that journey difficult. The most important meeting of the whole church was the small group leaders. That was the core of the church. The small group leaders were the core of the church, and are looking after them so that they could then be equipped to keep going with what it's like to lead a small group of very different people, some extremely difficult. And that sort of chimed in with how I'd always felt about church. Why is it that actually more loving people are outside the church? People who are laying down their lives and wouldn't even know about God. People who were doing extraordinary things with justice, but weren't doing it for God in any way. And then you come into the church and you find a group of people who are often consumers, often very passive. That was always a puzzle to me.
So even back then, being very aware of how church can be unhealthy as well as healthy, but how it can be unhealthy.
Church is such an extraordinary thing, isn't it? That gathering of people with that balance of care and impact in the community.
Did you find people within the church were open to learning, and not, as you know, not in that patriarchal way, being told the answers, but did you find people wanted to grow, wanted to question, wanted to wrestle with things? Yeah, how open were people to that?
There was, of course, a range. And I don't know whether you've had church plants start up in your locality, but what we discovered was that when you were a new church plant, the people who were attracted in were the ones who were disillusioned with their church. And that in itself was quite difficult. So we learned to have a very rigorous joining, welcoming, but not for non-Christians, but for people who were transferring from other churches. We laid it out very clearly what the church was about, and so that they knew that they weren't what they were coming to, and we could go back to them and say, you know, how are you finding this? Because this is what we warned you were coming to, because it would take a lot of leadership time to try to get them on board with the vision of the church, because it was different.
One of the things I'd like to ask you about a little bit is more about the Enneagram, the Enneagram, but and what part that plays or can play in discipleship, or whatever word we use for becoming more loving, more, you know, growing in that way. But before I ask you that, could I ask you how you came across the Enneagram and what difference it's made for you personally?
Yes, I found out about it shortly after David died. The family were reacting to his death. They were in their 20s, my kids, and it was just a lifesaver to explain ourselves. I mean, at that stage, my younger daughter came with me to do the course. We both discovered we were 8, but we thought we knew what my son and other daughter were, and we got it right. And so it really helped in that early stage, which is why I went on with it, because when I was trying to understand what was happening to us as a family who'd lost a very precious husband and father, David was really good in those roles, and well, he was great anyway, the help that the Enneagram gave me to go on that journey made so much difference. So I knew that it was something I wanted to get more involved in, because it had so been there for us at that difficult time.
And for those who don't know, so some of our church, some of those who are part of the church, and I think some of those who have been watching online for the last few months know a little bit about the Enneagram. Could you, I know this, trying to condense something which is so massive and so, it can be so complex in some ways. How would you describe it to somebody who hasn't really learnt much about it or knows much about it?
Yeah, I like to put it that it's about the inner journey. I was just so moved years ago, and I think I know why, by just that small statement by Jacob after he'd been fighting with the angel all night, and he suddenly realized that, well, this is what he said. He suddenly realized and said this to God: "You were within and I was without." And that sort of, just those few words says it all for me, because the Enneagram is about discovering what's going on within. It's also in John 2:2, he says there is a truth within us which is always true, and I have come to see that truth is the truth about who I am. So the Enneagram helps, I think, to discover ourselves, and then, as Jacob said, oh, we find God because God is within all the time. There's no separation between us and God, but it's it's as we go inwards and discover who we are in that inner journey. So to me, that's what the Enneagram is about. That's the purpose of it, is for us to discover ourselves, our true selves, ourselves imagined by God, where the Holy Spirit dwells, where the life of God is within us. And it does that. It's a tool. It does that by describing very accurately these 9 different personality types. These were first identified in the 4th century by the Desert Fathers, and the Enneagram has been on a journey since then, and came into the 20th century through the psychologists. So it's become a tool used by psychologists for helping people to understand themselves. Persona means mask. The masks that seem more like me than my true self does, because I'm so used to living with them. Created as a mixture of our inherited nature and our childhood's experiences, not necessarily traumatic. Creating these personalities, also called the egos, which hold us and which have allowed us to survive, but are actually very, very limiting. So it has an application into personal and spiritual growth, into much healthier relationships, into work situations, when it comes to understanding people's difference in communication, decision making, attitude to conflict, working with teams in work situations. Those are the nuts and bolts of our relationships at work, in a church, but in marriage and family as well.
Does this question make sense? Yeah, because as I'm asking it, the question's forming in my mind. But something about, I've been around churches for about 25 years now, and as a minister, different ministers and different people in churches are often asking or trying to find a discipleship tool that they're going to help learn about. And to me, it feels like to be honest, a lot of it's head learning, maybe formulas, maybe head knowledge. And there are some good discipleship tools I've seen out there, but none have totally resonated with me. But there's something that I've discovered through you, who introduced me to it or helped me understand a lot more about it. But there's something about the Enneagram that I think gets to the heart of what discipleship is about. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely, because all I have to give to the world is me. And if I am not able to understand who I am, I think our personalities affect the way we see God. I think our personalities affect the way we relate to God. And I think our personalities show us where the stumbling blocks are between us and God. So the discipleship journey to me is becoming more like Jesus. I remember I was involved with the very last live link, Billy Graham, which I helped to run in our local town in St Albans. And I noticed that it was almost entirely the teenagers who responded at that Billy Graham meeting. And I felt such a sense of, right, I'm going to work with these young people. This was before we church planted. And discipling teenage leaders was one of the most exciting things that I've ever done, because they were then leading the small groups, the cell groups. And we had a network of these small groups of teenagers working together over the town. Didn't matter which church they went to, they were part of this network. The churches bought into it because they could see the health of it. And what was happening there was that these young people were learning that the Christian life was about going deeper. It wasn't about the outer world. It was about who you are, what you've got to offer in terms of not your skills and abilities, but in terms of who you actually are. And that mindset that they could see and take on at that stage through the way that we were working with them I think was very exciting. And they've gone on, a lot of them, over 100 of them, gone on to do extraordinary things.
As we come to the offering today, the invitation is to offer up your heart, soul, mind and strength, the whole of who you are to God and the whole of your life. So let's do that together now. Dear Lord, thank you that you see us perfectly and that you love us perfectly. Thank you that you created us, you knit us together in our mother's wombs, and your creation is good because you are a good God. Thank you that in essence we reflect you. Thank you that you want to love us as you reshape us into your image, so that we resemble your image more clearly, that which you made us to be. So this morning, Lord, as we offer up the whole of who we are, our past, our present and our future, our strengths as well as our weaknesses, Lord, we want to declare our trust in you. We ask your Spirit to make us more attuned to what you have to say, to help us know that which is good from our past and past teaching and past experiences and past knowledge, that which is good of what we know and understand today, but also lead us on, help us see you more clearly, and also become even more the individuals, the church, the people that you desire us to be. Loving you more deeply, loving each other and others more deeply, as we learn to love ourselves more deeply. Amen. One of my, when I think back to Bible college, which I finished about 11 years ago, and I'm not a critical person about courses, but I was asked to give feedback to the principal afterwards, we all were, and one of my concerns was in ministerial training, and this is somebody who had come through social work training and counselling training. I was concerned that there wasn't much emphasis on self-awareness and
Oh no, really?
self-awareness. And I think 11 years being a minister, where I've got to is that one of the main things that causes unhealthiness in the church, in individuals, and wider in the world, you know, with all people, but it's a lack of self-awareness. And that's why I think the Enneagram, you know, is so helpful. What are your thoughts on that, the importance of self-awareness within churches, for Christians, for everybody, and for ministers?
Yeah, if you just take one aspect of that, and this is only one aspect to Jesus said that we were to love the Lord our God. You know, this was his important instruction to us. With our hearts, our souls, our strength, and our mind. That comes from Luke 10. Our hearts, our souls, our strength, and our mind. If you ask Christians how they do that, they look at you blankly. And the Enneagram then comes in with its understanding of how the head, heart, and the gut can work together to produce maturity. And it's one aspect of the Enneagram. It's one verse from the Bible. And then we are to love the Lord our God with our souls. Now, our souls, what are they? Books written on it. I've read books on that. And actually, in the end, I come to the conclusion that our soul is our true self. It's the thing that is eternal. It is where God dwells. And the Enneagram, my goodness, it shows you something about your soul. It talks to you about your true self, the essence of who you are, and how that gets covered by the ego. So the Enneagram as a discipleship tool is many faceted. It helps us to know about how we die to self. It helps us to know how to love God in those ways. It helps us to understand our subconscious drivers, which is Paul talking in Romans about the good that I want to do, I don't do, and what I don't want to do, I do, and that the subconscious drivers that are involved with that. And I think it tells us quite a lot about what Jesus was talking about when he talked about the broad and the narrow way. Now, I know we've had different interpretations on those verses, but for me, the broad way is my ego, defined by the Enneagram with its subconscious drivers, its passions and its habit of thinking and its defense system. And it leads to destruction. And then it describes the narrow way, the living from our essence, the living in a way that leads to God. Well, it doesn't lead to God because you find God there when you're working with it. So I've always been a discipler ever since I had those teenagers when they were in their 20s and they're now in their 40s. So a long time. I've never found anything like the Enneagram that helps you get to the absolute nub of it. And I'm living that journey. Even this morning, I was being coached by my supervisor and we were going really deep into the subconscious drivers that have been causing me difficulties. It's an ongoing unraveling of the ego,
You
separating.
You never get there. You never learn. It's not about learning certain doctrines and that's all you need to do. It's about a deep work that's ongoing.
Yeah.
I heard a phrase the other day called spiritual bypass, when we can learn things in our heads. We can learn doctrine, we can learn verses, we can learn, lots of good things, but actually it bypasses that deeper work and that touching on the essence of who we are. And for me, I think that would explain why I'm not trying not to be overly critical, so it's an observation that why some people can seem to be going to church for many years throughout their lives, but actually a transformation or getting in touch with their essence, that's not always obvious. Would you say, what are your thoughts on that?
When churches are a place where people get hurt and there isn't a way of processing it with an understood tool, that actually means that we can't communicate freely and authentically. To me, that I have some sense that this is a piece that we've missed since the Enlightenment. That pre-Enlightenment, I've loved discovering about the pre-Enlightenment saints and going right back to the Desert Fathers and the other great saints and the mystics. And we lost something that they had. We've not progressed in a way. Our heads have become, our thinking, our rational has become far too important. And I spend quite a lot of my time now that I'm coaching is helping people to live from their heart, which is like a foreign language for quite a lot of people.
And as you say it, I'm thinking it helps you understand other people more as well. So, healthiness within the church, as well as understanding ourselves better. People who see the world differently, it helps that, for people who want to try and understand and improve relationships, it gives us that tool as well.
Yeah, and it means that in a church, what you know is not the mark. There are two things, I think, in a church that mark you out as being a mature Christian. One is what you know, and the other is how well you're serving. Classically, if you're a preacher on a Sunday morning or a small group leader, or you're serving with the homeless, or all these things that are good, but actually that's all about the thinking and the doing, and where is this place of the heart, which is such an important concept in Christianity. Loving with your heart. What does that mean? It's not an emotional thing. It's a level deeper than that.
Is it fair to say that without that work, without that coming from that place of depth, that you could be doing a lot of things, but maybe it coming from the ego, sometimes from an unhealthy place as well?
Yes, and that's why it becomes so important to us, because if our ego is challenged, then we will go into one of our negative patterns, and other people notice that. They cause us pain and they cause other people pain. So those negative patterns, when it is coming from our need, which is what the ego describes, our defended self, then that's where the problems come. But when you're in that free and open space of your true essence, somebody else gets the glory for something you've done. Does it matter? If the plan you've got in place fails, actually, I'll just get on with the next one. Or the freedom just in those spaces, it's like opens up an enormous wide field, rather than being stuck on tram lines of the ego.
That sounds wonderful, what you're saying there. Yeah, something resonates very deeply in what you're saying there. And you've touched on why for individuals it can be helpful, to say the least. And you touched on earlier some of your noticing some of the unhealthiness of church systems in terms of patriarchy and that kind of autocracy and hierarchy and leadership. And you're pushing up against an open door there with Worthing Baptist Church, because that's a lot of the stuff we don't want to be like. That's not part of our culture. We don't want it to be part of our culture. And open to, not just open, but affirming of women in ministry and all that kind of thing. So, so with the Enneagram being useful to individuals, with there being big faults within how churches are set up often, but how would you see, what would you see as your positive vision for how the Enneagram could be used more within a church?
If there's a culture in the church of, we used to call it every member growing. That was one of our values. If there's that culture that each individual is taking responsibility for this discipleship journey, for them growing themselves towards God, and if there's an understanding that this is a heart journey as well as a head journey and a doing journey, a body journey, activity, which the Enneagram helps to bring, then people are saying, how do I need to change? What's the next step forward for me? How can I get free from this or that? Or I keep hurting my friend, or why am I keeping on doing these things? But it isn't something that we used to have. Do you have this a sort of like a program that new people go through? I've already mentioned that.
We don't. We try and continue. Yeah, we try and do it more in a more, I suppose, a more natural way, or inviting them to journey with us and us learn from them. So no set program.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when the Enneagram becomes a set program that everybody has to go through. I think it trivializes it. I think it's something that people have to come to themselves. I need something else. I'm stuck. I'm living with too much pain. I want some understanding of why this is happening. So I don't think I could see it as being part of the culture of a church, but I can't see it being like, thou shalt do the Enneagram. That doesn't work for me. It's got to be the individual wanting to go down that pathway.
I love that. And you know a little bit about our journey as church and with the Enneagram, and that's certainly something that we've noticed, that it's teaching and advice about if people want to learn more. Some people seem very receptive, very open, and some people seem quite reluctant or just not time for or not interested. So that resonates with you, that it's something that's offered and maybe encouraged, but it has to be personal choice.
It has to be personal choice, but within the culture of this every member growing. No passengers. Whoever you are, every member is growing.
And an acknowledgement of the importance of that inner journey.
And the way we teach our children is that right from the start, they are part of this process of every member maturing. So what's the next step for them, and how are they going to grow through this opportunity? What will this bring up for them right from children? Which I think is so relevant in this pandemic world, with so many children and teenagers having really suffered. They're ready for more answers about why this is so painful for them. So it's a moment.
That feels very different to a model, and I suppose I'm making an extreme to make a point, although there are extremes of it, but it's more than a model of just downloading what we know as teachers and adults to the children, and you just have to agree with these 10 things and then you're set for life. It's more inviting them on that inner journey at a very young age. They're probably there on it better than many adults already, but encouraging them in that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to introduce children to God via nature and not via the Bible. I'd love them to find the Bible when they're old enough to understand it, if we ever are old enough to understand it. That knowing the Bible stories is not as important as finding God in nature, in people, in relationships. What is love? Let's not look to the Bible to answer that question at first, but let's look to their sense of loving nature, their sense of what it feels like in their bodies when they are connecting with animals, or all those things which very, very small children absolutely understand but don't have a language for.
I love that thought that the Bible, the first Bible, is creation and nature itself, and maybe sometimes often children are better at reading that Bible and getting it, and we lose that ability to do that. What do you think, with your thoughts about the pandemic, the last year, and why? I mean, for you, has that reinforced the fact that the Enneagram and this kind of learning is even more important?
Well, my work as a coach has shown me that people are asking the questions, especially those people. We've had various sorts of pain, haven't we? The pain of bereavement. I know about that one. The pain of trying to keep your work going and homeschool your children. I see my families, my children going through that. And then we have the pain, as I have also experienced as a widow living alone, of hours and hours and days and months alone. And what it's like just to be with yourself so intensely, with no respite except a screen, an occasional shop for food. I've found that people have got to the end of themselves and they are open and wanting to know, where is God in this? Where I don't like this person who I am. Is this actually who I am? Because if this is all there is of me, what's all this about? So I think the pandemic has created stress for those three profound areas. And those people who've been alone, and those people who've been alone with bereavement, have been pulled to the end of who they are, I think. Maybe that's the place you find God.
So through brokenness and struggle, maybe more of us are ripe to go deeper.
Well, that's what I'm discovering. I've never been as busy as I've been for the last 3 months with the Enneagram. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask one last question? And it could be related to everything we've touched upon, or it might be something else. But when you look at Christianity, at churches these days, what kind of lessons more widely do you feel that we need to be learning? Are there any particular areas? Patriarchy, and moving away from that towards real equality. But that's my words. Yeah, anything that jumps to mind that churches need to be learning these days, be more open to?
We're all longing for God. Why else would we be in church? Well, maybe that's a bit of a black and white statement, but longing for more of God. And immediately we're led into more understanding. I mean, I have enough understanding to last me a lifetime, more knowledge. I need to actually make that real in my everyday life. And so I see this heart cry of Jacob. You were within, but I was outside. Jacob was aware of battling, fighting through the night. He didn't stop to discover that actually God was with him anyway. So how do we stop and discover that God is within if we're not helped to do that in the church? And I think that is our heart cry. Where are you, God? I love the 2 questions that Francis of Assisi asked all his life, never finished answering them. I don't think they're questions I will ever stop asking. And the first question is, who are you, God? How can I ever say that I know who God is? And the second question is, who have you made me to be? Well, I know more about that now at my age than I used to. But I think I will never ever know the end of that question. But the Enneagram helps me.
For me, that's a lovely place for us to finish today. I want to say a massive thank you, and we're going to carry on letting the church know more over the years about the Enneagram and encourage them on this journey. And I think they'd love to meet you in person one day.
That would be lovely.
That'd be fantastic. But can I just ask you to close with asking those two questions, and then we'll leave it at that, because I think they're wonderful questions.
Okay, so Francis of Assisi questions. Who are you, God? And who have you made me to be?
Thank you, Liz.
Sun.
started today's service with a reading from Genesis 32 from verse 22 onwards and heard about this wrestling with God that Jacob had. You know and I know that life can feel like a wrestle sometimes, and especially over this last year with the pandemic. But my prayer is that we trust God is in the midst of all of that, and that he encourages that wrestling, he encourages that questioning, because in the midst of all that, it's as though he can reveal more about who we are, more about who he is. And as in this story with Jacob wrestling, there's a transformation that we are invited to become involved with, God transforming us from within and actually clearing away that which gets in the way of us being who we are and who we were created to be, our essence, our good essence. Sometimes, as within this story, it involves pain, it involves suffering, and we have the hope also that it isn't just suffering and pain for the sake of it, that actually through that we have hope. God is with us in the midst of that, but also he's leading us to a better place, a better version of who we are, and also helping improve our relationships with him and with other people. So my prayer is that whether you try to understand or get involved, the Enneagram or another tool, I pray that you hear God's invitation today to trust him more deeply, to allow him to work in the depths of who you are, trusting that actually, in essence, you are good. And whether or not you are aware of that goodness, whether you might be more aware of some of the stuff you're not so keen on, God sees it all, but loves us anyway. And it's because of his love that he wants to be part of that transformation as we become more and more like him, hopefully, and with his help. Because actually, whatever tool we use, whatever we do, it is actually God who does all of that transformation. All he asks us to do and all he invites afresh is for us to cooperate with him. Let's do that more and more. Amen. And may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. And may he bring you home rejoicing once again in through our doors.